Hey folks, this is Mike here. I'm going to be starting at 7 o'clock. I don't know if Jill's here from the library, so if any of you who are registered, if you could just put in the chat right now whether you can see my screen and if whether you can hear me, I would appreciate it. With a webinar, I'm never in touch with the audience, so I'm never really sure if you could hear me or not. So I would appreciate if any of you just chat with me and let me know if you could hear me or not. All right, thanks, guys. Three of you called, chat and said you could hear me and see me, so that's good. So we'll start at precisely at 7 o'clock. So I'll be right with you. Hey, folks, it's about 3 minutes before. Unless the library shows up here, I will be running the whole program, and we'll get started in just a couple of minutes. We'll start right at 7 o'clock. Right now, we're looking at about 25 people, so we got a pretty good crowd here, and we'll start in just a couple of minutes. Just about another half minute, we'll get started, guys. Right now, we still have people coming in. Okay, folks, my clock says 7 o'clock, so I'm ready to get started. My name is Mike Ivankovich. I'm out of Doylestown, Pennsylvania, and this is one of 20 different programs that we offer. We do a What's It Worth appraisal program. We do 4 home downsizing programs. We have 3 how to deal with how to buy and sell on eBay. And then we have 12 different dealing with house and estate contents programs. This is one of them. This one is how to deal with your original art and fine art prints. We have other programs on books, coins and currency, figurines, china, things like that. But this one we're going to focus on original art and fine art prints. To give you a little background, I am in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, and I wear a lot of different hats. I'm an appraiser, and my job as an appraiser is to help people understand the value of what they've got. I'm also an auctioneer. And in addition to talking fast, what an auctioneer does is help people turn those things that they no longer want or need into cash. I've written a book called Home Downsizing in 4 Easy Steps, and this is pretty much what I do today. I help people deal with their stuff, their antiques, their collectibles, their household contents, the good, the bad, the ugly. Still have a radio show once a month on WBCB in Philadelphia called What's It Worth? This is what we do. We help people deal with their stuff. We've done over 700 programs nationally since 2021, most of them with Zoom. But the best description of what I do is this. Take your house, turn it upside down, and shake it. If it falls out, I deal with it. If it doesn't fall out, most likely the realtor is going to deal with it. And one of the areas I deal a lot of in is art and prints. So tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about original art and prints. Now, I want to warn you guys, we got about an hour program here. There's no way I'm going to make you an expert on art within an hour. That's physically impossible. But we'll talk about the different types of artists and what to look for in the art that may be hanging on your walls. We'll talk about how to identify select original art and how to identify select fine art prints. We'll talk a little bit about how to evaluate how desirable your art is and how to evaluate condition. We'll talk a little bit about how you sell it, because there's a lot of different ways you can sell your art. We'll talk about appraising and insuring it if you want, and a whole lot more. So we got a lot to cover. It should be done within about an hour, maybe a little bit over. If you're going to be working with art, I suggest that you have a couple things, not necessary for this program, but to have them around the house. First thing you want is a 10x loop, a 10 power loop. That's vital. I wear one to every appraisal that I go to because I never know if I'm going to be looking at art or prints, and they'll help me identify the type of artwork I'm looking at. You also will need a tape measure because it's also important to measure your art. Size means a lot when it comes to dealing with art, both not only the overall size of the frame, but the inside portion of the print. Access to the internet helps, so you can evaluate and look up certain valuations. And How to Identify Prints is a book by, as far as I'm concerned, this is the best book I ever read on how to identify prints by Bamber Gascon. You can get it on the internet, but if you're into this business, it's well worth getting because he does a better job than anybody I've seen of identifying prints. Now, when it comes to art, the name means everything. I throw out some names here: Da Vinci, obviously, Picasso, Van Gogh. Those mean a lot, but the artist is totally important. If you have 2 pieces of art, one by a noted artist, one unsigned, even if they're just as good, the one who we know the artist is almost always going to be worth more money. So the name means almost everything when it comes to art. But just because you have an artist, not all artists are the same. There's different gradations. Just the novice artist. I guess I might be considered a novice artist because I have absolutely no talent, but I've sketched some things. There are student artists, students who either studying art in school or studying under a specific artist. They're amateur artists. These might be people who are getting pretty good. They're growing. They're entering their artwork in local competitions and things like that. There are emerging or speculative artists. There's a lot of this around where people with money are speculating who's going to be the next Andy Warhol, who's going to be the next Van Gogh. So they try to buy certain artwork early before the rest of the world catches on and prices start going up. There are established artists. Those are people who've been in the business for a while, and people are always looking to acquire their names. I collect a local artist in Bucks County here by the name of George Booz. Not a big name, but he's a good established artist, and his artwork is getting more and more expensive to find. Then there's those artists with the proven following. They've just tried and tried over the years. People like Redfield in Bucks County art, where I'm from, Fern Coppage, Solder, people like that, where they're just successful whenever they're sold at auction. And then certain artists are the best of the best. But another factor with artists, like it or not, is whether they're alive or dead. And the simple reason is, if an artist is alive, they can still create more artwork. You don't know how much more artwork they're going to create. If an artist is passed, obviously they can't create any more artwork, so the market will determine what their current value of the art is worth. Even with an artist, no artist, I don't care how good the artist is, that artist is not going to be expert in everything they did. Every artist starts out early. They start exploring. What are they going to major in? Are they going to major in ship scenes, snow scenes, landscapes, winter scenes, whatever? So that they start exploring to develop their own niche. A lot of their early work is below average. So just because you have a Redfield, just because you have a Warhol, just because you have anything, doesn't mean it's the best of the best. So every artist had good, better, and best. Most artists had mostly average work. Not every artist had a masterpiece for everything they did. Some were better than others, and every artist had a few masterpieces. But there are various gradations for every artist's output. Some artists specialize in different areas: ships, snows, vintage, things like that, animals, things like that. Original art. Let's kind of talk about that a little bit. Make it as simple as I can. Original art means there's one of a kind, one watercolor, one oil on panel, or whatever else. Whereas a print is multiples. There's more than one of the exact same print, depending on which format they use. What's the medium with the original art? We'll be just discussing that in just a minute. Oil on canvas is arguably one of the most popular forms and generally brings the highest prices, all things else being equal. Basically, it's what an oil on canvas is. It's literally canvas stretched on a stretcher. But with oils, they can use multiple layers of paint. They create more texture, more depth. It looks more realistic. You could put your fingers over it, and you could feel like a added dimension to the artwork. Oils allow artists to do a lot more different things. They're harder to create. They take more time to create, but they're more durable. Even if an oil on canvas has some damage, we'll talk a little bit about that coming up. You can have it restored if there's a tear, if there's some paint flaking. You can restore those kind of things. So all things equal, oil on canvas is probably the most desirable form of artwork that you could be looking for. Similar to oil on canvases or oil on boards, except they're literally painted on a panel or a board instead of a canvas. On the back of this frame, you can see how this board is held in, and the painting's on the front. Again, very desirable by certain artists, and they hold up pretty well. Watercolor, some artists specialize in them, but our watercolors generally are not perceived as being as difficult as oils. They don't hold up as well as oils, and oftentimes they're not going to bring as much money. Watercolors are usually on paper. Basically, what they do is they'll mix their paints in water and paint right on the paper. And a watercolor is almost always going to be under glass. If oil on canvas, oil on board or panel is not going to be on glass. So if you're not sure what you got, start with looking at the glass. If there's glass, it's probably not an oil on canvas. I've seen a few of them framed that way, but most of them aren't. Whereas if it's under glass, there's a good chance the starting point might be the watercolor. Pastels, chalk artworks. Generally, they're done on textured paper. As far as I'm concerned, I mean, obviously artists are still doing pastels, but as far as I'm concerned, the heyday of the pastel market was about 1900. There's often going to be a wood backing because that was a very popular way to back your artwork around 1900. A lot of pastels are larger. Back in the 1900s, the walls, house walls were maybe 14, 16 feet high. They needed larger pieces of art to decorate the wall, so pastels were oftentimes bigger. A pastel is almost always going to be glass unless there's something wrong with it, because otherwise it would smear very easily. Some of the artists that I collect, have collected over the years, William Henry Chandler. He was circa 1900. He was out of New Jersey. There are hundreds of his artworks floating around. I believe it's Albert Gladhar, Andrew Gunderson. These are some of the early 20th century names that are attracting pretty good numbers today. But generally, pastels don't sell for as much money overall as oil on canvases or oil on boards. Then with original art, you have pen and inks. These are not going to bring all that much money usually, unless they're by a noted artist. If you have a pen and ink by Picasso, great. That's going to bring some pretty good money, but most likely another more complete form of art by Picasso will bring more money. Sometimes these things were one color, sometimes were multiple colors. And with sketches, sometimes they're just preliminary sketches. An artist who's going to do an oil on canvas might have done a pen and ink sketch just to get a general feel for where they wanted to go with it, versus the final artwork. So pen and inks generally aren't going to bring that much money. Some other things which we're not going to talk about, but which you should know are around, are original artworks using just pencil, charcoal, acrylic, gouache, spray paint. Sculptures are a whole different animal. I'm not going to get into that, but these are all different forms of original art. But original art can bring pretty good money, as we'll be talking about in just a little while. As far as I'm concerned, the bane of most artwork is these artists who can do absolutely beautiful work, and then they write their signature in a legible manner. If the name is so important to the artwork, we have a dilemma. We have beautiful artwork, but we can't read the signature. We can't say who it was by. And I don't understand why so many artists did such beautiful work, and yet they wrote their name illegibly, but they did. So there are certain ways you could try to get around that. Wherever possible, try to identify the artist that you're dealing with. One possibility is you take an artwork, photograph it, and try and find who the artist is on Google Images. That may or may not help. I use Google Images quite a bit. Another site you can go to is askart.com. I'm going to be talking about AskArt in a little while. But with AskArt, each artist usually has several examples of their signatures. So if you think it might be Gene Rivera, well, you could go to AskArt, look up Gene Rivera, check some of the signatures, and see if any of those signatures match up. That can sometimes help you identify who the artist is. Another area I go to an awful lot is Google Lens anymore. Google Lens is wonderful. I will photograph the artwork, and sometimes it will help me identify the art based on the art itself. And sometimes I'll photograph the signature, and it will tell me who the artist is based on that. And sometimes it doesn't work. There's other ways to do it. But again, the key thing, one of the key things with art is identifying the artist. And if you can't read the signature, you got a lot of work ahead of you. Let's get into some original prints. We're going to spend a little bit more time on original prints here. Print, in my opinion, is arguably the most misunderstood term in the antiques and collectibles business. You've got original art, original prints. Original art, remember, is one of a kind. Oil on canvas, oil on board, whatever. There's only one of them, unless you duplicate it somehow. Whereas a print, think in terms of multiples, whether it's printed on a printing press, whether it's printed on a copper plate, a steel engraving plate, there will be multiples, and they're designed to look almost exactly alike. So original art, one of a kind, print, multiples. But then we also have to get further into this, because not only are there original prints, such as an engraving or an etching, which we'll talk about, but there are reproductions of those. I was doing an Antiques Roadshow event the other day, and someone brought me in an etching, and they thought it was an etching, and I had to say, no, it's not. What it is, it's a print of an etching, because if you looked at the piece of art, you could see the curvilinear lines. It was of that type, but there was no plate mark impression or indentation around the artwork. There was no raised feel to the ink. So there's a big difference between original prints, reproduction prints, and then one area I didn't throw in here, that's fraudulent prints, fakes. That's a whole different story, but I'm not going to get into that tonight. With original prints, there's primarily four types, and I'll get into each one of them just a little bit. There are what we call relief prints. There are intaglio prints. There are planographic prints, and there are screen prints or serigraphs, and each one has a different following of specific artists. When you're talking about a relief print, okay, this is a very common form. Relief printing, the ink is applied to the non-recessed area, which is what you actually print with. Now, the easiest way I could explain it is take a look at a stamp. You've all seen rubber stamps before, and the letters extend a little bit above the base of the stamp. And so only the tops of the letters get covered with ink. That's what prints. The rest of it behind it doesn't. That's really what a relief print is. What the artist does is they'll take the board, the plate of whatever it is, whether it's a board, piece of copper, piece of steel, and they will engrave, they'll cut away around the design. And then when they ink it, the ink only stays on the upper portion, not in the grooves and the recesses. And that's what will literally print on the paper. So there's ink on the surface, there's no ink in the grooves. Intaglio is exactly the opposite. With intaglio, what they do is they cut into it, but they put the ink in the grooves, not on the flat surface. So when they print it, the ink comes out from the grooves. We'll get into this in just a couple of minutes, but there's absolutely no ink on the surface. A planographic piece is think of a lithographic. I guess the best description would be maybe a curry or an eyes. This is where it's printed from a flat surface as opposed to the raised surface. There's no grooves here. This is done without getting into a whole lot of detail. With the property of oil and water don't mix. They'll cover it with a layer of oil. They'll cut away the design. So when they put on the ink or whatever, it's going to be repelled by the area where the grease still is. It will go in where the grease has been removed. It's a process I don't quite understand, but they've been doing it for years, and that's what's called a planographic type print. And there's the screen or the serigraph print. What that is you're using a mesh. The mesh is the print is designed on the mesh, and then they pull the inks, the different colors over, and the ink transfers through the mesh onto the medium, the paper, whatever you're using, except in the areas that have been blocked out. So you'll use different blocks for different colors is the best way I can describe it. Different types of original prints. You've got engravings, you've got wood engravings, you've got etchings. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these. We've got lithographs, we've got offset lithographs. Screen prints we'll be talking about a little bit. Giclées we'll talk a little bit about. Chromolithographs we'll talk a little bit about. And although it's not really a print, this is more of an original piece of art, but reverse painting on glasses, I'm just going to touch on that briefly. Some other limited edition prints we'll also talk about. I'm not going to get into dry point etchings. I'm not going to get into stipple engravings, mezzotints, aquatints, etc. If you want to learn more about those, I'm serious. Get that book by Bamber Gascon. It explains all of this stuff in incredible detail, but we certainly don't have time to get into everything tonight. Let's talk about an engraving. You've probably heard the term. Engraving is probably one of the earlier forms of prints, and it certainly predates etchings. And what they do is they will take what they call a burin, one of these tools that have a sharp point, and they'll take generally a piece of copper, which is a softer metal, and they will literally cut grooves into that copper with the sharp burin. And then they'll brush off any scraping so that you have a flat surface with grooves. What they'll then do is there's a way that they can ink the grooves and not the surface. And then with pressure, they will transfer the ink from the plate into the paper with a lot of pressure. And you can generally identify engravings by straighter lines. Engravings have straighter lines generally more so than etchings, which are more curvilinear. We'll talk about that in a minute. A lot of these earlier prints, these 16th, 17th century prints were oftentimes engravings. But if you're going to look at what you got, if the lines are generally straighter, good chance it's an engraving. Another thing an engraving will do is oftentimes there will be a plate mark indentation around where the copper plate is pressed into the paper, because that's how they will transfer the ink from the plate to the paper with a lot of pressure. And etching, on the other hand, is very similar to an engraving, except that the lines are more curvilinear. They generally use copper. The problem with copper, the good news was copper was easier to etch. It was a softer metal. The bad news was it generally started wearing out after a couple hundred impressions. With all that pressure, after a couple hundred impressions, the lines would start fading out. So they either had to recut the plate or come up with a new plate. Another way they got around with that was steel engraving, steel etchings, where they used a piece of steel, tougher to cut into, but once you did that, you might get a couple thousand impressions from the steel plate versus a couple hundred from the copper plate. A wood engraving, they literally cut a piece of wood for the design. Now, what you'll generally see is like in this picture over here, you got some more thicker areas of black and all that. So different forms. Some people love wood engravings. They're generally not too hard to see because although there's some lines, you generally see more thickness here where they cut into the wood. Usually it's wood. Sometimes they use metal plates, less engraving, etc. On the lithographs, courier knives. We've all heard of courier knives. That's a planographic print. And oftentimes the courier knives were printed or were etched, drawn, however you want to describe it, on a large stone. You can see these stones. Then they would put the ink on there and they would press it onto the paper where it was a black and white print. It would be a monotone print. And then the real courier knives, the ones from the early to mid late 1800s, were hand colored. The 1955 courier knives were from it was the Hartford calendar prints. Those were offset lithography prints. You'll see the dots on those. But with the courier knives, you won't see any dots. You'll see hand painting over some black and white lines. And again, it has to do with the natural antipathy between water and ink. They don't mix. So they would cover the stone with grease, cut through it with a design so that the ink would only go where the grease has been removed. Offset lithography is what you're probably going to run into. This is the majority of prints you're going to find. Offset lithography is machine-based. They set up the machine, they turn it on, and it just keeps printing and printing, printing. Every image before and every image after basically looks the same. The key thing with offset lithography is there are four primary colors in the world of printing. There's black, yellow, magenta, cyan. But if you take those four colors, 4 times 4 times 4 times 4, it gives you 256 color variations that you might be able to print with. Now, I guess the easiest way I can explain that is when you were a kid, if you were coloring in a coloring book, you took your red and your yellow crayons to make orange. That's kind of what this does. That takes these various four colors and various percentages of each. They give you light red, dark red, bright yellow, orange, etc., etc. And the way you tell it is you have a loop. I am always carrying, I don't know if you see this or not, but I'm always carrying a loop. But when I go on appraisal, I got my loop around my neck. I wear it all the time because it's the first thing I look at. If I take a print and I look at my loop and I see these thousands of little symmetrical dots, I know I'm dealing with an offset lithograph. If I see other types of lines, but they're not the symmetrical dots, there's a good chance that they might be lithographic prints versus offset lithos. But when you see here, when you think of Maxfield Parrish prints, those were offset lithos. Parrish would do the original artwork with his beautiful blues. Then they would take that original artwork and they would convert it into whatever plates were needed to turn on the printing presses. And so with a Parrish print like Daybreak, they might have printed, who knows, 100,000 copies or whatever. And every one at the end of the print run looked like the one before it and the one after it. The colors may fade if they were hung in front of a window that got a lot of direct sunlight. They may have stained if water got in there, but as they came off the press, everyone looked exactly like the one before and after. Screen printing, I'm not really all that familiar with, but silk screening, etc. This is where they take that mesh, that's form of mesh, and they can squeegee colors through it. Where they want the colors to appear, the mesh is open. Where they don't want the colors to appear, it's blocked out and ink can't get in there. And they'll do several runs to formulate it. So a serigraphy print is probably going to be more valuable to most people than an offset lithographic print, just because of the handwork that went into it. A giclée, you might have heard that term. It's a relatively new term, but it's basically a digital print. Giclées were printed using inkjet printers. So it's not really original art. It's a copy of an art. Sometimes, usually they're copied on paper. Sometimes they're copied on canvas, I believe. But what I've seen a lot of people do is they're saying to themselves, wait a minute, I got a $500,000 Redfield painting in my house. What if my house burns down? What if someone comes in and steals it? So what a lot of people have done is they have taken their original artwork, had it converted into a giclée, frame it up nicely, put it on the wall, sell the original piece for $500,000 or whatever it's going to be. And so they have a piece that looks just as nice as what they had. They just don't have the original, but they got the money in their pocket. I know quite a few people who have done that. That's a matter of taste, but it's one way of getting around chromolithographs were popular around 1900-ish. Chromolithographs, you're not going to see the dots, but you'll see the gradations. They were big around 1900. I got confused early when I was starting to get involved in this. I one time bought a painting by a famous artist, and I looked at the back and I saw it was a canvas, and the front looked great, and I thought I had a winner until I took it to somebody and they pointed out to me that it was a chromolithograph mounted on a canvas and a stretcher. So just because you see a stretcher in the back doesn't necessarily mean you have an original piece of art. It might be a chromo. Again, 1900. I see a lot of these wood backings holding the artwork in from the early 1900s. If you have a piece of wood backing, it's 100 years later, 120 years later, still get it out of there. These things are notorious for transferring the acidity through the wood into the image. We did another antique roadshow type of event yesterday, and someone brought in a Sherman Marches to the Sea lithographic print, but it had the wood backing, and you could see the brown lines going down through the wood where the acidity had come through. So if you have a piece of art that you're planning on keeping, get rid of that wood backing. I don't care if it's been there for 100 years or not. Take it out and put some acid-free backing behind it, and it'll probably extend its life. Reverse painting on glasses, there's not really prints. I guess this stuff is painted on there. But I figured I'd cover it because a lot of houses have these things. And these were basically early 20th century, and the painting was done on the inside of the glass. But after 100 years, a lot of this stuff is painting, chipping. So I don't see a whole lot of value in these. They generally go for 10, 20, 30 bucks. They usually don't go too much more than that. Sometimes the frames are pretty. Sometimes the frames are worth more than the reverse painting on glass. Then you've got limited edition prints. This is one of the things we're going to see probably in most homes. And the whole concept behind the limited edition print, in my opinion, was that an artist came out with an original piece of art. They could only sell that to one person. And someone came up with the concept and said, wait a minute, why don't we take that original piece of art and create just a limited edition? And so people will, therefore, more people can enjoy our art, thought the artist. Wink, wink, we could also sell more copies of our art. And because they're limited, there will be a natural demand for these things. Well, there's demand for some limited edition prints, not all that much. A limited edition means there's a limited number of prints printed. That's it. Whereas an open edition means they'll print as many as they can sell. They run out, they'll print some more. So in theory, limited editions should bring more than an open edition. In reality, most limited editions aren't bringing a ton of money today. Again, these are multiple. Sometimes they're offset lithographs, sometimes they're lithographs, but they're going to be produced in multiples. When you see a number like this, you almost always have a limited edition print. The way the nomenclature works, the number on the right is the total edition. In this case, there were 1,500 of these prints made. and the number to the left represents the number within the division, the addition. So this one was number 767 out of a total edition of 1,500. Well, let's be honest, if there's 1,500 others out there, it's not rare. Some artists had limited editions, 1 out of 10, you know, a total edition of 10, total edition of 25. And that's pretty reasonable. Thomas Kincaid had editions of 15,000 and 25,000. I mean, that's as close as open edition as you can get. There's a theoretically a number 1 should be worth more than a number 767. Some people think that way. Most people say if I can get a 767 for a lot cheaper than number 1, that's what I'm going to get. So when it gets to run sizes, how big is too big? There's just a fine line between limited and unlimited edition prints. How do you identify these things? First thing you start off with the number. That will usually appear somewhere. The artist is usually on the left side. The title is usually in the middle, and the number is usually on the left. But there's so many limited edition artists around. These things were really big in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Well, times change, and a lot of those things that were hot in the 70s and 80s are no longer hot today. I don't care what you paid for it. They're generally not going to bring what you paid for them many years ago. So what's going to drive the price is demand and rarity. How many people want to own this thing today? We don't care how many people want it in the past. How many people want to own that thing today, and what are they willing to pay for? Understand that with limited edition prints, there's certain variations. Now, you may have something that says EP instead of a number. Well, the EP meant artist proof. And usually before they did the master run of prints, pulling prints off the press, they did maybe 10 or 20 artist proofs that went to the artist. There were certain other things like that. So in this case, if this was a total edition of 50, there might have been 70 or 75 prints pulled, with many of them being artist proofs or mistakes or error prints or things like that. And then my message to you is beware of the certificate of authenticity. I do another program called 25 factors that are, you know, what's hot and what's not. And what I say in that is if you have a certificate of authenticity, you probably pay too much for it. It just strikes me as the people who were issuing these prints oftentimes gave you a certificate of authenticity with all the information, the print number, the runt number, the title, all this other stuff. But in my opinion, the certificate of authenticity was generally designed to make you feel better about the maybe high price, excessively high price that you pay. So certificate of authenticity doesn't really guarantee much, and it doesn't add much value, in my opinion. Okay, and then there's reproduction prints. These are things like if you go to New Hope, PA, there's head shops there, you know, that's where they take good art and they just reproduce it in mass numbers. A reproduction is simply a copy of someone else's artwork. Nothing creative. You take their artwork, you create a plate, put it on the press, and crank it out, and you sell as many of those babies as you can. Use a loop to identify these offset lithos. Again, get yourself a loop, get a 10x loop. You can get them on Amazon for 10 bucks, 12 bucks. If you're going to do anything with your artwork, make sure you use a loop because they will help you identify the lithographic versus the offset litho prints. How important is the frame? Well, as far as I'm concerned, it's quite important because the objective of the frame is to add beauty to the picture. I mean, a beautiful frame is not going to do anything for an ugly piece of art. And a beautiful piece of art and an ugly frame, well, you can still always reframe it. But the frame just adds to the overall beauty, and certain pieces of art require certain types of framing. You have the original frame. Well, a lot of times the original frames have been damaged. So you have the personal dilemma. Do you want to hang a piece of art that has its original artwork with a damaged frame? Or would you prefer to replace that original frame with another similar frame from the same period? So you still have an old frame, but it's not original to the piece. Or you can some people just go and they have a new frame cut precisely to size. The frames may be damaged. Well, if you have a highly desirable frame, most frames can be repaired. There's people who could re-gesso them and all, but it's not cheap. It's going to cost you some money. If the glass is broken, my advice is repaired as quickly as you can, because if you have a picture with a piece of glass that's broken and you leave it in the attic or the basement for 5 or 10 years and forget about it, I guarantee you by the time you come to get it, dust will have seeped into these cracks, sucked into the print. You're not going to get it out. It totally destroys it. So if you have broken glass, replace it as quickly as you can. And then you want to replace it with the proper backing board. If you've got that wood backing that's highly acidic, get it out of there, replace it with some acid-free board, and then put another backing paper on it so that you're all set to go for another 50 or 100 years, because the dust can't get through the glass. The dust isn't going to get in the back because you have a new backing paper. And a beautiful frame is going to add value to it. Hopefully you can find some frames by some noted frame makers. There's Frederick Harrar is a Bucks County frame maker. Ben Bedora is another Bucks County frame maker. Their frames alone are worth hundreds of dollars, sometimes 300, 400, 500, upwards of $1,000 or more if they're the right frame. Sometimes the frame is going to be worth even more. But what you don't want to do is put the wrong frame on the wrong piece. You don't want to, in my opinion, you wouldn't want to take a piece of modern art and then put it in an antique frame that's gessoed and all. It just doesn't fit. So you want to get the right frame for the picture, and it's your own dilemma. I mean, obviously, something with the original frame should be worth more than something with a replaced frame. But in my opinion, I would much rather have an attractive replaced frame than an ugly, damaged original frame. That's just me. All right, you got art. How do you figure out what it's worth? What are you going to do with it? Well, what's going to determine the value of your art? You know, I have lots of art around my house. I wish I had some really good art. Can't afford the Redfields and the Souders, but the first thing is name. Who is the artist? Again, you take two pieces of art, one is signed and one is unsigned. Almost always the one that's signed will bring more money. The name is extremely important. The subject matter is important. Right now, like I said, I'm in Doylestown, PA, Bucks County. The Bucks County School of Impressionistic Art is hot. Redfield, Solder, Coppage, Walter Baum. These things bring real good money around here, but they probably wouldn't bring as much money up in Monhegan Island in Maine, whereas Monhegan Island artists generally wouldn't bring as much down here. They would bring more up there. So location can mean a lot. The medium, I would much rather invest in an oil on canvas than a watercolor. I'd rather invest in a watercolor than most pastels, and etc. How big is it? How big art? That's going to determine the value. When the COVID hit a while back, people stopped buying art. What a bunch of artists started doing is, instead of doing one 16 by 20 piece of art, they took the same size material and did 4 8 by 10s. And then they would sell those for, instead of, like, if the original artwork was $2,500, they might have sold 4 8 by 10s at $1,000 a piece, made more money. So a smaller piece of art generally, not always, but generally not cost as much as larger pieces of art. But in terms of what's going to value your art, sometimes people don't have room for extremely large pieces of art. So just because you have an extremely large piece of art, 6 foot by 8 foot, well, how many people have the space to hang that? Another factor when it comes to determining the value of art is shipping cost. You know, if you got a piece of art that's, let's say, 20 inches by 30 inches, and someone's going to pick it up at your house, that's one thing. But if you have to ship that to California and you have to box it up and ship it via UPS or FedEx as an oversized picture, the shipping alone might cost you $150, $200. So the value of the cost of the shipping is going to affect the value of your artwork. How hot is the artwork today? Some art's hot, some is not. Just because something was hot 20 or 30, 40 years ago doesn't necessarily mean it's hot today. What's the damage? Any damage can pretty much be repaired within reason, but it's going to cost you money. So condition is extremely important to determining the value of the art. And then again, is the artist hot today or not? A lot of people who are hot in the 70s are not hot today. They're bringing a fraction of what they did. And some of the artists that weren't even around 20 or 30 years ago are bringing top dollar today. So a lot of factors are going to impact the value of your art. Let's talk a little bit about damage in your artwork. Frame damage Like I said, some gesso frames can be repaired, but it's not free. It's going to cost you a lot of money. Sometimes you could go to a frame store. We all know how expensive framing can be if they got to cut a new frame, and also that's going to cost you money. If there's damage to the frame, it's going to reduce the value of your artwork. If there's broken glass, we already talked about that. My advice is get the glass replaced as quickly as you can, because I can't tell you how often I've seen pictures that have been in attics for 10, 20, or 30 years with broken glass, and then that dust gets in, there's a line that gets in the print, there's really no getting it out. It ruins the piece of art. If you got holes, tears, stains, stains can sometimes be cropped in prints. So you might crop the stain off the edge if it's a small stain, and you reframe it in a smaller frame. Tears can be professionally replaced. Holes can be replaced. Sometimes if you're looking at an old canvas and you look on the back, you might see a little patch on the back. Well, that means it was repaired at some point. It had a tear, and someone took it and had it professionally restored. There's many, I should say many, there are a number of art conservators and art restorers around that can repair your work, but they are professionals and their work is not cheap. Sometimes you might see foxing. I see this a lot in my hand colored photography, the nuttings and all. And the foxing, as far as I can tell, is generally pieces of art, iron that were in the paper that over the years have oxidized, turned into rust, and there's really no getting them out, so it kills it. So if you have foxing, it's going to cause damage. Is the color as sharp as originally printed? Great, that's wonderful. But if you had an piece of art or a print that was in front of a window for 30, 40 years that got morning sun, the artwork's probably going to be faded. Faded colors is going to impact the value of your art. The backing board, backing paper. I have certain clients who prefer to buy a piece of art with no backing paper because they're going to take it home, clean it, and put it together themselves. Others just want to take it and hang it on the wall. They don't want to do anything with it. They just want to take it home and put it on the wall. So sometimes if you reback it, add a new acid-free backing paper and board, you're going to increase the value of it. And I just understand that, people were telling me all the time, oh, Mike, it's a beautiful condition, it only has a little damage. Well, a little damage is still damage. Certainly there are degrees of damage, but any damage is going to impact the value of your artwork. How do you figure out what your art is worth? Well, what I tell people is think of realtors. If you're going to put your house on the market, a realtor is not going to come in and just pick a number out of the air and say, all right, we're going to price your house at $750,000. What they're going to do is they do their homework. They look for comps. Realtors are going to look for what have comparable houses, 3 bedrooms, same neighborhood, same style, 2 stories versus rancher, etc. And they're going to try and find out what have comparable homes like yours sold for in your neighborhood, not across town, not across state, in your neighborhood, recently, within the last 6 months. We don't care what things sold for 30, 40 years ago. What are they selling for today? As appraisers, that's what we do here. That's how we figure out the value of art. We look for comps. We look for comps in terms of artist, size, subject matter, condition, all those things we talked about. We look for comps before we try and find what our artwork might be worth. Like I said, artwork, all this other stuff we look at. Is it signed? Signed art will almost always bring more than unsigned work. My rule of thumb, and it's not scientifically proven, but my rule of thumb is that there's only 2 types of art. Throw away every art book that's ever been written. There's only 2 types of art: collectible art and decorative art. Collectibles art is artwork that people actively go out of their way to seek. Whereas decorative art is stuff they buy because of subject matter and price. $50 or less is generally decorative art, at least in my opinion. How new is it? How recently was it sold? All that other stuff. Keep in mind, if you're using the internet, value equals sold prices, not asking prices. One of the biggest mistakes people make in trying to figure out what their artwork is, they go to Google and they put in Wallace Nutting print, and they see some numbers on Google and say, wow, mine's worth that kind of money. No, Google almost always is giving you dealer asking prices. That's not value. Value is a sold price. You want to find out what things have sold for recently, not what somebody's asking on it. and you can throw away any old art books that you've used. This used to be the big thing. Benezes used to cost like $1,000 for an edition of these that listed all artist information. All of this stuff, all art price guides have been replaced by the internet. You can get all this stuff on the internet one way or another, pretty much, if you know where to look. Google, again, like I just said, is mostly asking prices. eBay, eBay is okay for average art. You're not going to find $10,000, $50,000, $100,000 pieces of art on eBay. People are generally going to sell that stuff through quality auction houses. So eBay is good for some kind of art. If you're looking for hand color photography, prints, Maxwell Parrish, Wallace Nutting, Bessie Pease Gutman, limited edition prints, yeah, you'll probably find some numbers on eBay. But if you're dealing with really good art, you've got to go beyond eBay to get a feel for what your artwork is worth. I use askart.com. There's another one out there, artnet.com. I'll get into that in just a couple of minutes. You could also subscribe to invaluable.com for better art, liveauctioneers.com. These are not auction companies. These are auction platforms that auctioneers use to sell their merchandise. Two more are BidSquare, and WorthPoint is another database that we subscribe to. So these are all tools you can use to figure out what your art is worth. So what do you look for in these tools? Well, if you want to figure out more about art, do your research. Go to an auction. If you're not sure what art is bringing, go to an auction, in-person auction, or watch an auction online and watch what art is selling for. You'll see some stuff sells real high, some stuff doesn't. If you have a collection of Walter Baum paintings, you can certainly go in and find which auctioneers have been selling Baums recently, and you find out what Baums have sold for at that auction. You look at the post-sale prices. You can visit galleries, visit antique shows, shop around, but understanding that if you go into a gallery, you're seeing what the dealer asking price is. You're not going to get that kind of money. The dealer is selling at a retail price. The dealer can't buy at a retail price. The dealer has to buy at a wholesale price. So the only way you're going to get top dollar for your artwork, I got 62 people right now in this program. I'll ask you a question. Give me a show of hands. How many of you are professional antiques dealers? I'll bet you there's not more than a couple raising their hands. That means you're not going to get top dollar when it comes time to selling your artwork. You're going to get a wholesale price if you sell to a dealer, and the dealer is then going to turn around and sell it at a retail price. You want to figure out what it's worth? You can take a piece of art here and there to auction houses. Most auction houses, most major auction houses have a free appraisal day. You bring in one or two items and they'll appraise it for you. And what they're hopefully looking to get is your Van Gogh that you will then consign to their auction house. It's good business on the auctioneer's part, but if you have a lot of art, they're only going to do one or two pieces a day. Or you can hire an appraiser to tell you what it's worth. But I would just tell you right now, if you hire an appraiser to appraise your artwork, make sure that that person is not then going to turn around and try and buy it from you. Because if you sell to the appraiser who's just appraised it, how do you know they haven't lowballed it to try and buy from you at a cheaper number? So my rule of thumb is never sell to the person telling you what it's worth. But for some people, it would make sense to hire a professional appraiser to get you going in the right direction. I mentioned that I use askart.com. They charge. I pay about $350 a year, and I'm not suggesting that you use ArtFact if you're not in my type of business. But ArtFact does offer a 24-hour access to their database. So if you have 5, 10, 15 pieces of art across the house, it might make sense for you to get a 24-hour subscription. Get all your work together ahead of time, and you get the information you need, the artist's name, the size, any special things about it. And then you get in, you access their database, and for 25 bucks, that could be some very valuable information that you're not going to get anywhere else. Now, the key thing with AskArt is they only do original art. There are no prints. I should say no. Yeah, there's no prints on AskArt. And they're generally only telling you what's sold in the public domain. Artists do not report what they sold their artwork to anybody. Galleries do not report their art, what they sold their artwork for to anybody. So most prices on AskArt and ArtNet and some of these others are prices they've obtained from auction houses. that have sold artwork in the public domain. And I'm going to go through this in the next slide. You'll see what I'm talking about. But some of the things you want to look at for specific artists are how many items have they sold? What have they sold for? What are they selling for today? Because Asgard goes back probably 30 years in terms of data. So it's nice to know that maybe the auction record for a bomb was $97,000 in 2001, but that's 25 years ago. What are they selling for today? Sometimes if you don't know what it's worth, you could go in and find out what an artist is selling per square inch and back into a price. I'll show you how to do that in just a minute. These art sites will also tell you what percentage of the stuff is selling. That kind of helps you determine how hot the artist is. And is the artist hot today or not? Artwork is very fickle. Things that were hot 30, 40 years ago are not so hot today, and vice versa. And it gives you some other information, signature examples, biographies. Yeah, here we go. Here's a slide from Asgard. So this is Walter Emerson Baum. He's a noted Bucks County artist. Gives you just a brief bio. He was born 1884, died 1956, Acton, Pennsylvania, blah, blah, blah. Okay. It tells you here. Now, he's a very prolific artist. This website will give you 1,755 sold prices for Walter Emerson Baum. That means he sold a lot of his artwork. Sometimes you're going to find artists where they only have sold one number. With 1,700 pieces, you generally get a flavor for the auction results, the strength of the auction market. With one, you really don't know. It tells us right here that in the highest price ever sold for Walter Emerson Baum was $97,750. That was 2007. That suggests to me the prices might have waned a bit since 2007. His sell-through rate is 86%. That means of all the bombs that were put up for market that they reported, 86% sold. That's good. That's a lot of sell-through. And here's what I was telling you earlier. The price per square inch. Now in 2014, wherever they got this factor, they took the total size of a picture divided by the selling price to come up with the price per square inch. So maybe you don't know what your bomb is worth, but you have an 8 by 10. Well, that would give you 80 square inches times this number, puts the value at about $3,200 or something like that. So this is all good information to have. And then it goes down. You can sort it by auction date. You can sort it by highest price, the lowest price, the highest price. There's a lot of variables you could use. But here's one, and this is how accurate Asgard can be. This Walter Emerson Baum, the auctioneer has said they expect it to sell between $8,000 and $12,000. Here's the size, blah, 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 blah. It's selling at Alderfers at their catalog sale that probably just took place. What happens is a lot of these auction companies have catalogs. So Asgard downloads the catalog, but they'll do it before the sale occurs. And then once the sale is over, they'll download the price. So in this case, they're still awaiting the result. We don't know what it's sold for, but oftentimes most of these will tell you. If you get down a little bit further, it's going to give you the selling price. It'll tell you what it was estimated at. All great information if you got good art. If you got bad art, if you got prints, Asgard's not going to do you any good at all. All right, value art again. Understand it can be trendy. I had one client, she had one hot, I'm not even going to say who the artist was, but he was hot in the 70s. She was trying to get that money 30 years later. And I can tell you, it's not going to happen. These people aren't paying this money for this artist. As far as I'm concerned, old masters, which I like, are much softer today than contemporary art. Modern art is really doing well. Now, is it because of a proven track record, or are people speculating? Are people buying certain art saying, all right, I'm going to get into the trend early. I think this artist is going to grow. I want to buy now before it gets more expensive. It was like buying Picasso in the 20s, I guess. Outsider art, again, I think a lot of that is speculation because most of these outsider arts don't have a good track record. There's something called the Florida Highwaymen. They're hot right now. These were guys who did very average pieces of art, but they stood in the 50s and 60s, is my understanding. They would stand by the road. As people were driving to Florida, people would stop, buy some art directly from these guys. And now that has become a category in and of itself. Books have been written on it. Florida Highwaymen can bring pretty good money. Grandma Moses was a hot, really hot 20, 30, 40 years ago. She's still selling for good money, trust me. She's still selling in the $50,000 to $100,000 range. But I think one of the strangest characters I ever saw was a guy by the name of MC 5 Cents Jones. And he did crayon drawings, very simple, very childlike, but he was hot for a period of time. And there was some time that one of his pieces of art went for, I think, went for more than $50,000. And what we found out afterwards, or at least we speculated, that was the market wasn't saying that his artwork was worth $50,000. What the market was saying was that three rich people went head to head because they had to have this particular piece by MC Jones, MC 5 Cents Jones, and they bid way more than it was worth. And they bid like $50,000 for it. But the rest of the artwork never caught up. It never stayed on that. So be wary of trends. They certainly change. The artist. What has the artist award? What awards has he won? Who's owned it? If Jackie Kennedy owned a piece of art, you can be rest assured that it would bring a lot more money in today's market than if Mike Ivankovich owned it. This particular guy was Paul Allen. Paul Allen was one of the founders of Microsoft. He passed away, I think it was 2018, 2019. They just sold his artwork for $1.6 billion. His collection, 1.6 billion. So people would pay more for a piece of art coming out of Paul Allen's collection than something they bought at a flea market. Anything that was exhibited at the Met will bring a lot more money than something that was exhibited at a flea market. This piece of art came on the Mayflower, said my client. Well, prove it. And that's the key thing when you're looking for provenance. You can say anything you want. You can say the piece was owned by so-and-so, exhibited as so-and-so, but if you can't prove it, it's not going to do you much good. When it comes to selling the art, some art is liquid. Most of it is not. You're not dealing with cash. You're not dealing with jewelry. You're not dealing with gold and silver that you could take and convert it within a matter of minutes. Art is a tougher sell. Some of it you can move right away if it's priced right, but liquidity is going to depend on a lot of different things. So when you're selling your art, my advice to you is identify what you got. Your best way to get top dollars, know what you got before you sell it, not after it's gone. So identify what you got. Is it oil on canvas, oil on panel, whatever else it is. Do your valuation research. Use Invaluable. Use ASCAR. Use BidSmart, whatever. Do your valuation research before you sell it. Don't whine that you sold it too cheaply if you haven't done your homework. Look at your best-selling options. I'll get into that in the next slide, I think. There's different ways to sell your art. And then sell it. So do the other things prepare before you sell it. Don't sell it and then find out you made a mistake. You can sell your art to antiques dealers, art dealers, but they have to sell at a retail price. They can only pay you a wholesale price. Same thing with art galleries. Art galleries are there to make money. They can't pay you top dollar. And let's be honest. Well, if you can sell to a collector, good luck. We all think we're going to find a collector that loves our art the way we did, but not as easy as you think. Auctions are a good way to go. Auctions can reach people nationally, internationally. Auctioneers charge commissions. You can put your things on eBay, or you get an Etsy shop. First Dibs has lots of artwork. There's all different ways you can sell this, or you just take it to the local flea market and stand on your feet all day long. So the better art needs to be sold probably by professionals. My advice would be, if you have a good piece of art, take it to the right auction house, let them photograph it, describe it, guarantee it, sell it, ship it, take care of everything, let them earn their commissions, which is very much earned, rather than looking for the cheapest commission, because the cheapest commission is not always going to give you the best approach. Okay, auction dealer, sell it yourself. There's all different ways you can do it. There's pros and cons to each. There's no right answer for everybody. When it comes to commissions and fees, let's look at auction commissions. Auctioneers are going to charge you anywhere from, most auctioneers work on a sliding commission scale. The higher the price, the lower the commission. They would rather sell one $10,000 painting than $100 paintings, or however that works out. So they usually work on a sliding scale, but they might charge you for internet fees. They might charge you for photography fees. I don't even want to get into the buyer's premium here, but the auctioneer will look you in the eye and tell you that the buyer pays the buyer's premium, and I say BS. A buyer's premium, the auction business is the only industry that can charge more than the final sale price. If the auctioneer has a 20% buyer's premium and you buy a piece of art for $1,000, you don't owe the auctioneer 1,000, you owe them 1,200. If you went to the food store and your bill came to $100 and they said, well, with our food buyer's premium, you owe us 120, you'd stop shopping there. Auctioneers get away with it, but the auctioneer will tell you, don't worry about that. The buyer's paying it. And I say BS because most buyers aren't stupid. If they know that there's a 20% buyer's premium and they're willing to pay $1,000 on an artwork, or they're not going to pay 1,000 plus 20, they're going to pay 800 plus 20%, which gets them about to that $1,000. So indirectly, you're paying that buyer's premium anyway. And then if the artwork has to be shipped, because more and more auctions today are online only, if it's got to be shipped, I'm going to factor the shipping into what I'm willing to pay for the piece. So all that means is if I have to factor in the buyer's premium and shipping, I'm going to pay less for it. And the less the buyer pays, the less the seller is going to get. It's as simple as that. And then my advice, I mentioned this earlier, beware of free appraisals. Don't sell it to the person telling you what it's worth. That only gives them the incentive to lowball you, tell it it's worth less than it is. When you're selling art, understand that there are deep markets and shallow markets. Deep market, lots of people want the artwork. Shallow market, very few people are interested in it today. Primary artwork. I bought a George Booz directly from George Booz. That's the primary market. When I go to sell that piece, I'm going to sell it in the auction. That's a secondary market. You generally won't get as much money when you sell in the secondary market. Is the market hot or not? Some markets are much hotter than others. Okay, your objective is to buy low, sell high. That's what everybody wants to do. Well, if the economy is roaring, you got to understand that art is discretionary spending. Nobody needs your artwork. Nobody needs my artwork. So if the market is strong, you could probably get more money. If the market is soft, if we have some economic issues, 2008 financial crisis, for example, art became extremely soft. So the economy means a lot. What current trends are you following? Is that artist hot today or not? Expect negotiation. Anticipate it. The seller wants as much as you can get. I want as much as I can get. If I'm the seller, if I'm the buyer, I want to pay as little as I can. Usually the best place is to meet in the middle where both sides walk away happy. Should you get an appraisal of art? That's your call. If you're going to get an appraisal, don't sell it to the person appraising it. Why are you having it appraised? If you're going to sell it, probably not worth paying for an appraisal. But if you need an appraisal for insurance purposes, get a written appraisal. If you're in the middle of a divorce and you're fighting over what some things are worth, get an appraisal for the courts in writing. If you're going to donate something and you don't care about a tax write-off, doesn't matter. If you want a tax write-off, you have to get it in writing for what we call a non-cash charitable contribution. If you're looking to sell it, it's a fine line. I tell my clients, don't pay an expensive amount for an appraisal if you're just going to sell the thing. And then if you're curious, if you're just sentimental about it, well, maybe it's worth getting into writing, maybe not. Sometimes if you're going to liquidate it, a verbal appraisal is better. But again, be wary of getting that appraisal from someone who's then going to try and buy it from you. And if you're going to get an impartial appraisal, expect to pay for it. The appraiser is earning their fee. Okay, and yeah, beware of free appraisals. I mean, every ad you look at, pawn shops, jewelry stores, gold stores, they all say free appraisals in the window. They're not giving you a free appraisal, they're giving you an offer to buy. If you want to insure your art, talk to your agent. Each company is going to be different. Chubb, I think, is probably one of the better companies for insuring art, but most insurance companies have a limit. If you have an art collection that's worth $50,000 and you don't have it covered under a special rider to your policy and you lose it all by fire, most policies will limit you to $1,000, $2,000 for fine art. So talk to your agent to find out what you do to make sure your art is covered. Most of them want a written appraisal, not by your wife, not by your partner, not by your spouse, not by your kid, but by a qualified appraiser. Also be aware of overinsuring. You know, you may have had some artwork appraised in the 70s, that's selling for maybe a third or a half of what it was over the years ago. Maybe you're overinsured. So take a look at all this stuff. Any art can be repaired for a price. It can be cleaned, it can be patched, it could be repaired, but it's going to cost you money. If you're going to keep it, probably worth having it done. If you're going to sell it, my advice usually is don't pay for it. Sell it the way it is, and let the buyer incur that. So to wrap things up, by just about an hour is what we're doing here, a couple of minutes over. In art, the name of the artist is hugely important, very important. Condition is important. You can have the best artist in the world, but if there's a tear in the artwork, it's going to have nominal value in most cases. Frames, original frames are nice, but a beautiful frame, in my opinion, is more important than the original frame. Some prints can bring huge money, most don't. Most limited edition prints are not bringing good money. Don't really, I mean, you use eBay because it's free to value art, but your chances are you're not going to find all the artwork values that you need there. You're going to have to go to some other sources. And just remember, like I said, Ask Art, you get a 24-hour subscription, which might be ideal for you. Illegible signatures make things difficult, but there's ways you can search it up. It's going to take some time, but if you know who the artist is, you're probably going to get more money for it. And the modern art market, I don't care for it myself. I have no modern art hanging in my house, but many people love it. I think it's also speculative, but as of right now, it's one of the hottest markets there is. So what do we got here? You need to understand the original print. There's also reproductions. There's fakes out there. I'm not even getting into all that. There's only so much we could cover in an hour. So guys, that's pretty much it. So I'm ready to turn that down. And if anybody has any questions, if you want to throw it into chat, I'll try to answer it for you. Does Ask Art list international audience from Donnie? Yes, they do. They have, as long as the artists are carried by the major auction houses, they will. J.A., fascinating talk. You recommend using Google Lens to find out comps? Yeah, I'll start with Google Lens. Now, Google Lens will usually identify it, but you're going to have to go somewhere. It'll take you somewhere else to try and find what it's worth. And more often than not, Google Lens will take you to a Google asking price, which doesn't do us much good. Remember, value is a sold price. It's not an asking price. Someone else just put something else here. Rebecca said, can I recommend where to frame fine art? Actually, I'm in Bucks County. You're on Long Island, I believe. No, you're Massachusetts. I'm sorry. So I would go maybe either post on one of your local Facebook groups. Does anybody recommend the best framer in the area? Google professional framers. It all depends on whether you're looking to frame a $50 piece or a $50,000 piece. If it's a high-end piece, you might want to take it to a high-end art gallery. They could probably reframe it for you. So lots of options there. Anybody else with any questions? Going once. Going twice. Last call. All right, thanks, guys.